Deputy Murphy, 25 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Boucher. You're very welcome. I'd like to begin, if I may, with the BOI Group Liquidity Committee minutes from the 29th of September 2008. Your reference is BOI C3B, pages 19 to 21. Do you have that document?
I'm familiar with it.
Familiar with the document. Okay, great. That meeting was the day of the 29th. Can you remember when it was convened and how long it lasted?
I can't remember exactly when it was convened, but I believe it was the late afternoon, I think somewhere between about 4 o'clock and 5:30. I think it went on for about 25 to 30 minutes. My memory of that was influenced by the fact that I had discussions straight afterwards with colleagues of mine in our retail division.
Okay.
So it was the late evening, late afternoon, Deputy.
Okay, thank you. And it lasted for about 25, 30 minutes?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. And you were informed by Mr. Goggin that a meeting had been arranged in government buildings later that evening on the possibility of a guarantee being provided for all borrowings by Irish institutions, and that's noted in the minute. Did you know Bank of Ireland's position at that time in relation to customer deposits, interbank borrowings, or debt securities issued?
I think the focus was primarily on the what was happening in the interbank markets and with the funding. I think the minutes of the meeting and previous minutes of previous meetings. If I just say that these were quite informal meetings, it was really updates. Would have shown that we were funding reasonably well. We were rolling over in the interbank markets, but the rolling over was becoming much more short-dated as was happening. We had some pressure on corporate deposits, but the retail deposits were reasonable, and the UK deposit base was relatively small, but was reasonable.
And the minutes indicate that Mr. Goggin was aware that the guarantee might include Bank of Ireland. So was anyone asked to pull together the relevant information as to what would be covered under such a guarantee?
No. So, not to my recollection, and no.
Okay. The minutes also state that a draft guarantee was prepared by the committee according to the note of the meeting. It says that. But Mr. Goggin has told us in evidence that this is incorrect, that there was no draft of such a guarantee or list of institutions that it should cover prepared for Mr. Goggin for use of the meeting in government buildings. Is this correct?
That's my recollection as well, Deputy.
Okay. And was there any discussion at this meeting at all using a piece of paper or a note or something around which your discussions were based?
No, I think if I can just give a context, Mr. Goggin came in, I think, towards the end of the meeting. He said that he was himself and some senior bankers were attending a meeting in government buildings. He said that one of the items which would be discussion was some form of a guarantee. But the meeting, to my recollection, kind of broke up. As I said, these were quite informal. We were just gathering together, updating each other what was happening. It wasn't a decision-making forum. But I have no recollection of a guarantee. I think that's subsequently corroborated by the fact that one of the businesses for which I was responsible, a licensed subsidiary, ICS, had been omitted from the list of guaranteed institutions, and that was causing some problems for customers in ICS, and we had to engage with the authorities in the following week to try and get ICS included.
Well, just tell me a bit, if you could, about how minutes are drafted. Was someone in the room to take minutes?
There was kind of, again, it wasn't a committee which required a quorum or that, but there was generally someone who was taking if there was action points. Okay. But we were taking also our own notes of our own action points.
And before minutes like these would be circulated, would someone sign off on them? Would someone check them?
First of all, I should say, Deputy, I had not seen that particular document till the inquiry. It's headed a draft, so I have no recollection of it being circulated to me as a draft, and certainly my understanding is my colleagues could not find a non-draft version.
Also in the minutes from that meeting, it says that you stated that the group should make the point wherever possible that did not request the guarantee and did not require it. Can you just elaborate on that point? What do you mean, and make the point to who? And was this point about fact or about presentation?
Deputy, if I could point out, I think there may be some confusion. I think there's been a copying of a minute from the 30th of September. The back page of that minute is attached to one of the 29th of September. I can provide to the committee the actual minutes of the 29th and the 30th, both in draft form. So the comment I made was on the 30th September. I recall that comment. It was the day after the guarantee, and there were particular issues which were emerging that certain banks, we were aware, were starting to say that it was Bank of Ireland had asked for the guarantee for themselves. I was at a meeting of the Irish Bankers Federation that morning, and the meeting had been requested to be, in particular, to focus on things that we were not permitted to market the guarantee, and there was a request of the Irish Bankers Federation. Two of the people from a couple of other banks had mentioned that we heard you guys went in and asked for a guarantee from yourselves, and we were hearing from some of our dealers that rumour was going around in the market. I was annoyed, and also I felt it was appropriate and necessary that we made it clear in the market that Bank of Ireland hadn't gone in and asked for a guarantee for itself.
Sorry, I just invite you to come a bit closer to the microphone.
I beg your pardon, Chairman, I'm sorry.
Just a bit closer to the microphone, thank you.
I'm sorry. Chairman, would you like me to repeat anything?
No, you're fine. You're fine.
Just to clarify that, Mr. Boucher, and if we accept that minute is from a meeting of the 30th, did the bank need a guarantee on the night of the 29th?
We didn't feel that we needed a guarantee in terms of the pressures we were facing on the markets. I think one of the things that we felt, and subsequently proved to have been correct, is that we had very significant collateral ourselves. So we had about 50% of our assets were in mortgages, Irish and UK mortgages. So we had quite a lot of eligible collateral. But I can't say in 3-4 weeks' time, if the markets had continued to be very tough, if events continued in the absence of a guarantee, would we have needed one? I can't say that. On the afternoon of the 29th, night of the 29th, Bank of Ireland didn't feel that it needed a guarantee in its own right. I think that's also corroborated by the minutes of other meetings that we've provided. We didn't identify a guarantee. Okay. Our focus and engagement in particular in that period of time, I wasn't involved directly in the engagement, but there was engagement with the Central Bank and others to try to ensure that the ECB and other authorities would be widening collateral criteria, and that was our focus.
Thank you. Can we just turn to your statement briefly then on pages 8 and 9, if I may? Because in that you recount some details then from later on in that evening when Mr. Goggin goes to government buildings. You were asked to remain in Bank of Ireland, is that correct?
No, I decided to. I think there was a number of us decided to stay. We have to remember it was the night of the 29th. There was an awful lot going on. Amongst other things, one of my jobs was to ensure, for example, that our branches were properly staffed. We were not putting in through any IT changes. We were making sure our ATMs were heavily loaded, because if there had been an incident which would have perceived that we had a lack of cash, that could have been very difficult. I was organising that staff would, who were on part-time would come into branches, etc. So I was there because it was necessary for my role as head of Retail Ireland, but also obviously there was a lot going on. The TARP was going through Congress, and obviously we were looking at our exposures to US banks and our exposures in investment markets. We gathered together, myself, our head of strategy, the chief financial officer, chief risk officer, the head of wholesale markets, and some other colleagues gathered in a meeting room we have in the executive floor, and we were awaiting communication from Mr. Goggin as to what was happening.
He phoned you 3 times, is that correct?
Directly into the conference room, that's my memory, 3 times.
Did you receive any personal calls or direct calls? From
Mr. Goggin, no, directly. I know that Mr. Goggin was also in communication with some of our colleagues at a more middle management level on certain technical and other issues.
Okay. The second phone call, I think, according to your statement, advised of a systemic guarantee. Can you recall at what point in the evening this was?
We were asked we were asked about to provide if we could provide support to Anglo-Irish. From memory, that was about 11 o'clock, 11:30. We had a credit committee to decide the basis that we would be willing to provide that. Mr. Goggin participated in that. It was a formal credit committee because obviously it was a large exposure. And then Mr. Goggin came back from memory, Deputy, I would say around about 45, maybe an hour later. So slightly after midnight, I can't remember exactly, but around about that time, to advise us that the government had decided there was a guarantee for all of the banks. And at that stage then, there were questions about, were subsidiaries included, etc., what was included, what wasn't. A couple of our colleagues were, including our chief law officer, were asked to just confirm the licensed subsidiaries we had, i.e. licensed depositors and all that, for inclusion in the discussions that Mr. Goggin was having.
And just my final question at this point, if I may, Mr. Chair.
But I would just say, my clear understanding is that there was a systemic guarantee.
Okay. And just my final question then is, was Mr. Goggin aware of the bank's total exposures at this point when you were informed of a systemic guarantee that would cover your bank? Did he know the full position of the bank in that meeting?
I must presume he did, yes. I mean, we'd been looking at, on an ongoing basis, a daily basis, we'd been looking at our liabilities in different markets, etc. I presume as the Chief Executive, he would have been aware of that.
Including the subordinated liabilities?
I suspect so. I think we were all probably slightly more focused on those liabilities which were potentially leaving the bank.
Okay.
But I presume he was, yeah.
Okay. I'll move on then, if I may, Mr. Boucher.
Yes, Deputy.
I want to go back to 2003 when you joined the bank. You moved into corporate banking, is that correct?
That's correct,
yeah. The bank was traditionally viewed as a conservative bank, as Mr. Goggin stated himself. Would you have agreed that the bank was a more conservative bank than other lenders in the Irish market at the time?
Yeah, I mean, I had, when I joined the bank, I thought there were certain gaps in where the bank was. It had been the Bank of Ireland had an image of being a relatively conservative bank, yes.
Okay. Did the culture of the bank change during your time there?
I'm not conscious of some kind of step change, but I think over a period it did evolve over a 5 to 6 year period. Yeah.
Did you ever feel that the bank was under pressure to change its model or its business, given the apparently rapid success of banks like Anglo-Irish Bank?
No, I think there was, for our businesses, Anglo wasn't, Anglo was a competitor, but it wasn't a competitor across the range of businesses we had. What I was conscious of, even though I wasn't directly interacting with the markets and the investors, albeit I met them, was a perception of Anglo, not a direct competitor. Well, it was a competitor, but not across all of our businesses. But certainly there was a market perception that Anglo, their price earnings multiple, i.e. what the market was prepared to pay for their stock as a multiple of their shares, was higher than the banks. We were hearing that they had a much cleaner business model, that their management were very focused, that they had a great visibility on things like their pipeline of deals, etc. So it was the Anglo thing was more about a market perception rather than, I think, interactions in individual parts of our business, with the exception of our property lending activities at the higher end.
I'll come to that then, because in July 2001, that was before you were in the bank, the Group Risk Committee set up a trial initiative for a specialised property financing unit within business banking, and the purpose was to write higher risk, higher return property transactions. Now, in January 2003, when you were there, and sorry, the reference for this is BOI B1, page 55. In 2003, in January, it was recommended to the committee that the initiative be established on a permanent basis with a confirmed limit of 100 million. The objective had been to allow business banking to compete more effectively, in particular with Anglo-Irish Bank. Is this an example of Bank of Ireland changing its business practice to compete with Anglo?
If I could just point out, Deputy, just as I didn't join the bank until December 2003.
I beg your pardon. Okay,
if I could expand, when I joined the corporate bank, there was confusion in the bank about property lending. I found that the corporate bank, there were certain structures. There was a lack of focus on, say, family-owned, large, mid-corporate businesses. There was confusion about responsibilities for different sectors. And I recommend to the group that we establish within corporate, and we bring into corporate a lot more of the higher volume and certain types of more risky lending that was going on in retail Ireland, to bring it into corporate, where we felt there was a greater focus and skill set. So that unit that you referred to was brought into corporate.
This happened in November 2004, the dedicated property unit. Is that your recollection?
It would have been, I think the second half.
Okay.
I made recommendations to changes of the structure in the first half.
We have a minute on this, and it's in BOI B2, page 23, and it is from a meeting on the 9th of November 2004. And it talks about this establishment of a dedicated property unit. And the rationale it gives in that minute is that in the past 5 years, we've underperformed in this top-end market, which has been dominated by banks with specialist property units, most notably Anglo-Irish Bank. So is this an example of Bank of Ireland changing its business practice to compete with Anglo?
I think it would have been an example of us bringing more focus, probably more marketing to it, whether it was Anglo or Bank of Scotland. Yes. I think if I could just mention again, Deputy, we restructured the corporate bank at that time. Mm-hmm. We had a lack of focus on family-owned large businesses. I brought in people from Ulster Bank to specialise that, and I recommended a restructure of the group, and that's what we did. But certainly we did compete with Anglo at the higher end corporate property market.
And this was your initiative, this new unit?
The restructuring of corporate was my recommendation, which was a total restructuring of corporate to focus on different areas.
And did you continue to have a role once you moved into head of retail?
In that, no, I didn't. The corporate was responsible for corporate lending and that type of activity.
But in terms of the dedicated property unit, were you still involved?
No, I didn't have a direct role. Okay. I was a member of credit committees where large transactions came to the credit committee. So I had a role in either declining or authorising large transactions that had been recommended by business units.
Did you personally manage relationships then with clients who had exposures over 30 million?
No.
You didn't manage any relationships with any developers?
I would have relationships with customers across the group. So I would have been involved in marketing or meetings with customers as the head of more in corporate, really. In retail, I wouldn't have. In 2000, so in corporate, yes, I would have met customers.
So you would have managed relationships with?
I wouldn't. So the structure, Deputy, was that we had relationship managers who would report into sectoral or unit heads. And for large customers, I would have been involved in meetings with those customers from a marketing or to give, or if it was felt that it was necessary to give the customers certain feedback on things that we couldn't do.
Would you ever have helped large customers in other transactions, ones that were perhaps not with your bank or outside of banking?
From time to time, customers would ring me and look for advice.
Okay. For example, would you have ever written in support of a planning application for a large customer?
As a matter of record, I did. Yeah. But that was not in support of a transaction we were involved in.
No. Do you think that's appropriate?
No.
You don't think it's appropriate?
No, it was a mistake.
Okay. On your appointment as Group CEO in 2009, a significant shareholder of the bank wrote to the chairman stating that you must have been responsible for fatal errors of judgment, including advancing loans to developers on the strength of overstated land values and insufficient security. Were you?
I was a member of a management team that was involved in making mistakes, including to property.
On the point that was made at the time in 2009, do you accept that there was an impression that you were too close to certain clients of the bank?
I don't accept that. People write all sorts of letters. Ultimately, if I do have a recollection, when I was appointed as chief executive, I went before the shareholders of the bank, and 99% of the shareholders of the bank voted for me. Certain shareholders didn't.
Okay. In correlation with the new unit, which was targeted at the main players, as it was described in the minute, in the property sector, in mortgage lending, growth moved from 27.6 billion to 60.8 billion between 2001 and 2008. And if we go to reference document BOI B2, page 10, we'll see that there was a number of policy changes for mortgage lending at the time. Income multiples changed, loan-to-value policies changed, first start mortgages were introduced, and more flexibility was allowed to seasoned multi-property borrowers. Do you think these changes were appropriate? And is this an example of you changing your business practices to chase the competition?
Yeah, again, I would point out that a lot of that you referred to was prior to my joining the Bank of Ireland. But as we look now, with hindsight, that loosening of some of our criteria ultimately proved to be costly for us, for our customers, and for other stakeholders.
In July 2005, you introduced 100% mortgages. And the reason, as stated in BOI B2, page 17, was in response to moves by key competitors, First Active, Ulster Bank, and PTSB. Again, is this an example of you changing your business practices to chase the competition?
Again, that was before I joined the retail division, but I would then add that I joined the retail division in 2006, so I could have stopped it.
Were you on the credit committee in July 2005?
I wasn't on the group risk policy committee. I joined the group risk policy committee in February 2006 as a member of the group executive.
Okay.
But I would, the 100% mortgages was wrong.
100% mortgages was wrong. Thank you. Concerns were expressed by the financial regulator as early as July 2003, before you were at the bank, in the reference to this BOI B1, page 67. They did an examination, and the examination raises questions about the maintenance of lending standards in your institution and about your ongoing monitoring, management and control of risk in relation to residential mortgage credit. Can you explain to me how the financial regulator can express a concern like that following an examination, and then in 2004 and 2005 the bank might continue to actually relax its policies and standards in relation to mortgage lending?
Again, it was prior to my involvement, but there was interaction. We've also disclosed to the committee other documents which would have been our the bank at that time's answers to that. But ultimately, like I've said, Deputy, whereas I think we probably followed the market too much in relaxing our standards. Yeah, I would concur with that. Whether or not it was taken prior to my arrival or after my arrival, the decisions we took were wrong.
But in making those decisions, or at least being aware of the decisions and being in the bank then subsequently, were you aware that the financial regulator had been expressing concerns, or what?
I wasn't aware of the specific concerns there. I was aware that when the 100% mortgages were coming, there was interaction between several of my colleagues and the regulator at that time. The bank was uncomfortable with this market practice. The bank sought engagement as to whether or not the regulator felt that they could do something about it. But again, I would note that, and I was part of the team, if we had felt so very, very strongly, we could have not participated in that part of the market.
Okay. You came onto the board in 2006. Do you think there was an appropriate level of reporting to the board on the concentration risk being faced by Bank of Ireland?
No, there was not.
There was not?
No.
And what role did the Group Credit Committee and other committees like that have in terms of taking over control, if you like, of the bank?
Well, the board had decided to delegate to the Group Risk Policy Committee and the Group Credit Committee certain decision-making powers. If I look now at the level of reporting, understanding the board has of credit risks, developed concentration risks, a wide range of risks, the decision-making process that's involved in our risk assessment. If I compare our ICAP document of 2013, which I provided to the committee, to what was provided in the past in the board, the board didn't seek, and the board was not provided with a sufficient level of information to make informed decisions on the risks that were being taken.
Why wasn't the board provided with this information?
I don't think it was sought. I mean, I don't know if it was a conscious decision not to seek it, but there were gaps. I don't think that our information was so lax, but if I compare what it is now to compare it, it was night and day.
So was it insufficient oversight then on the part of the board? Is that how you describe it?
Yes, I think so.
So when we then look...
And I was a member of that board.
Yeah. But as a member of the board and also then, a senior manager, how did you reconcile that position of information not being sought or information not being provided?
I think it was, practices have changed, policies have changed, the world has changed very substantially as to what it was now and what it is then. I think that people genuinely felt they were getting sufficient information. As it transpired, they weren't. So I don't think there was a conscious decision not to seek information. I think that there was less focus on the understanding of risk. I think that was absolutely clear.
And the time you were on the board, you were also on the Group Risk Credit Committee.
Last question, or
The
Deputy.
Group Risk Committee.
Yeah, in terms of sequence, Deputy, I joined the Group Risk Policy. I joined the Group Credit Committee in December or January 2004 as head of corporate banking. I joined that was a committee of about 24 people, which would look at transactions on a weekly basis over certain limits and levels. I joined the Group Risk Policy Committee, which was a policy committee, when I became a member of the Group Executive, and that was in February 2006. And I joined the board of the bank in October 2006.
You were involved with the Group Risk Policy Committee from 2006, and then on the board as well, subsequently in 2006.
You know, from
Deputy, you're out of time.
in the
I'll bring you
dates,
back in. You're out of time.
within the same year, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you
very
very
much.
much, Chairman.